Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Thank you for joining us tonight. Lots to cover this evening, including the increasing and in some cases misleading pressure for the United States to intervene in Syria. Also, President Obama makes history, long overdue history, and a remarkable story emerges from the aftermath of the Boston bombings. All that plus click 3. But we begin tonight with the big, flashing headline breaking news of the day from the least popular branch of government. Branch of government widely seen as the most dysfunctional branch of government, the one that contains the right-wing Republican House caucus, committed to obstruction above all else. In that branch of government today we saw a remarkable display of urgency and pragmatic bipartisan problem solving come together in a matter of hours to fix the most pressing trouble facing America today. And that very pressing problem is extended travel delays for frequent flyers and members of Congress. Yes, it was a long and tortured path to triumph on this issue, but today, in a 361 to 41 vote, a resounding margin, the House of Representatives overwhelmingly agreed to tackle the scourge of flight delays being caused by the furlough of federal aviation workers. The FAA and the Transportation Department started sounding the alarms about furloughs. That's having workers take temporary time off back in February, explaining the consequences they expected to arise from the staffing cuts they were about to be forced to make by the sequester.
Flights to major cities like New York, Chicago, and San Francisco could experience delays, in some instances up to 90 minutes during peak hours, because we'll have fewer controllers on staff. And delays at these major airports would ripple across the country.
Look, this is very painful for us because it involves our employees, but it's going to be very painful for the flying public.
February. But then the furloughs actually started, and so did the actual flight delays. And suddenly, this week, Congress was demanding to know why they had not been warned.
I hope you have some answers for us today. But the first question I want answered is, why didn't you tell us about it beforehand?
We have been talking about reduction in available controller hours of 10% for months.
But you didn't tell them which airports, which airlines, which
We
times.
told them that they should expect significant impacts at major hub facilities.
Well, la-ti-da. Everyone knew that. That's what sequester is all about.
Well, la-ti-da is right. That is what the sequester is all about. But nonetheless, here we are, about 2 months into implementation of the sequester that everybody said initially they didn't want, but that some Republicans have since claimed victory for having adopted. And now we have the first piece of legislation to undo part of that sequester. And it's the part of the sequester that makes people wait longer at the airport. And as much as waiting at the airport sucks, here's who will not get relief from the bill passed today by members of Congress. Thousands of cancer patients on Medicare who are being turned away by clinics where they were being treated with expensive chemotherapy drugs. The roughly 70,000 kids expected to lose eligibility for Head Start programs. The 1,000 would-be scientific researchers who won't get National Science Foundation grants. The older Americans who stand to get millions fewer meals delivered from the Meals on Wheels program. The low-income families who are getting bumped from Section 8 housing assistance. Everyone who eats anything in this country, as the sequester stands to cost us 2,100 food inspections. And this phenomenon is not lost on anyone. The White House is not even really trying to defend the president's decision to sign the flight delay fix.
How is it fair or right or just that these kids on Head Start get their cuts, that these cuts go into effect at the Defense Department, and it's tough luck? But when a bunch of business travelers start belly aching because their flights are delayed because of these furloughs at the FAA, that they get one of the fastest pieces of legislation to move through Washington in recent memory. Why doesn't the president take a stand against that?
You could have thrown in members of Congress who need flights home also. But the fact is the delays are a problem for not just business travelers and members of Congress, but for many Americans. And that's a real negative consequence of the sequester. But your point is excellent.
Why is the president making an exception then for the air travelers?
The president believes it's good news to eliminate this problem. But as I've said, and he believes this is a Band-Aid covering a massive wound to the economy.
That's true, a massive wound. The sequester, let's be clear, is a horrible policy that never should have been implemented and should be repealed completely tomorrow. Full stop. But literally, the only virtue of the sequester, the only virtue, was the fact that it yoked together cuts across the board, such that middle-class folks who want to visit public parks in the summer, and wealthy folks who want to fly for business and leisure, and poor folks who rely on WIC nutritional supplements or home energy assistance, at least they were all being cut equally. If this horrendous policy, this self-inflicted wound, had one single tiny little redeeming quality, it was that at the very least it bound everyone together. And now Congress has wasted no time in undoing that lone semi-virtue of this despicable policy. This is not surprising. And it should not be surprising, but it is the most perfect parable I have ever seen for who Congress listens to. A Princeton political scientist named Larry Bartels did a breakthrough study in which he compared U.S. senators' voting records to the opinions of their constituents. And lo and behold, here's what he found. He found that, quote, in almost every instance, senators appear to be considerably more responsive to the opinions of affluent constituents than to the opinions of middle-class constituents, while the opinions of constituents in the bottom third of the income distribution have no apparent statistical effect on their senators' roll call votes. Here's what that looks like in chart form. See, if you fall into the low-income category, you might as well, not exist to your senator. Middle-income constituents do a little better. Looks like their opinions correlate at least a little bit with the voting records of their senators. But look at the high-income group. These are the people whose opinions seem to matter to their senators the most. The FAA deal cut today is what this chart looks like in real life. Recent polling and research shows a majority of Americans do not travel by air in a given year. The minority of Americans who do travel by air, particularly the minority who travel by air frequently enough to already be inconvenienced by the sequester's flight delays after a month, are certainly the more affluent among us. The defining feature of Congress since Republicans took control of the House in 2010 is the fact that it has been wholly unresponsive to the prolonged, grinding economic misery the nation is facing, and wholly unconcerned with doing much of anything except pursuing the pet projects of the donor class. And what happened today is like a perfect reductio ad absurdum of that idea, insofar as some of the people in this country who travel the most, and who do it on tight schedules, are themselves members of Congress. This is one step away from voting themselves a pay raise in the midst of the sequester.
Well, you know, I have to travel probably more than most of my constituents, and I face the same things that most people face, and I think my constituents know it.
Well, I think it was important to give the flexibility so that we won't inconvenience people in this really unacceptable way.
Inconvenience people in an unacceptable way. Here's what I wish could happen today. I wish every single cancer patient and every single kid who's getting kicked out of Head Start and every single person who's losing a job at a government facility because of cutbacks or furloughs, every family that's losing Section 8 housing assistance, I wish every single one of them could have gotten together and been bused by the thousands from all parts of the country to Reagan National Airport and been rolled out onto the runway and strung out in a line that stretched across the entire airfield so that those planes carrying the members of Congress who just cast this vote couldn't take off. How's that for inconvenience, Senator? Joining me from Washington, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, Democrat from Illinois, who voted for the FAA bill today. Joining me at the table, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, who voted against the bill. We asked the congressional Republicans if we could speak with any Republican representative who voted for the bill, and we're told not one of them was available. Congressman Jeffries, I'm going to begin with you and ask you, you were in the minority of people. There were only 41 people to vote against this bill. Why did you vote against the bill?
Well, sequestration is a random policy that's bad for the economy, and we need to do away with it completely. But what occurred today was an example of choosing a limited, affluent group of Americans to rescue from sequestration while leaving the most vulnerable amongst us, Head Start children, seniors who receive Meals on Wheels, public housing residents, expectant mothers who rely on government nutritional programs, the long-term unemployed who've experienced the benefits cut. We've left them on the battlefield to suffer continuously from sequestration, but rescue affluent business.
And you did not want to break those two groups of people apart?
Well, you know, in my view, we should not have broken those groups apart. And if we were going to intervene in any way, the responsible thing to do would have been to rescue those Americans who are amongst the most vulnerable in our society.
Okay, Congresswoman Schakowsky, let's stipulate here at the beginning. You and I and Congressman Hakeem Jeffries probably all share a pretty good conception of the ideal world we would be living in, right?
That's right.
That ideal world involves getting rid, I think, of the sequester. It involves Congressional Progressive Caucus budget. There's all things we can dream about while we're thinking about this weekend. But you had to cast a vote today, and you cast your vote for this fix. And I want to understand your thinking. Was it simply the pragmatic thing of there's one world in which we have flight delays, and there's another world in which we don't have these flight delays, so I'm going to take the world in which we don't have flight delays?
Well, there's another consideration, Chris. First of all, I agree with everything that you said and everything that Congressman Jeffries said, but there are also 47,000 federal workers that work for the Federal Aviation Administration, and they're going to see a 2-week cut in pay. Federal workers have already seen their pay frozen between now and September, and so to end those furloughs, I thought that I would cast a vote in favor of those federal workers. I also am supportive and a co-sponsor of legislation that would completely repeal the sequester and rail, as you have, against the cuts that affect so many people and are so painful, the 4 million Meals on Wheels that aren't going to be delivered. And, they also cut the Medicare and Medicaid anti-fraud work,
right?
Which returns, it's crazy.
Right. So, but there's a strategic problem here. There is a case to be made that the delays, the sheer inconvenience to members of Congress themselves caused by these delays was a point of leverage. And looking at this strategically, here I want to give you an Eric Cantor memo sent out to the House GOP on this fix. He says, as CQ roll call reporter tweeted last night, make no mistake, this FAA fix is a complete, utter cave by Senate Democrats, and if signed by the White House, consider Democrats' opening position, they would only replace the sequester with tax increases. By last night, Senate Democrats were adopting our targeted cut this, not that approach. This victory is in large part a result of our standing together under the banner of #Obama flight delays, which always cracks me up. Point being, they view this as a victory. And Congresswoman, my question to you is, has leverage been given up, or has a really nasty precedent been set? Well, we did the FAA fix. Now let's find the other things that we're going to go fix. And when everything is said and done, the kids on Head Start are still out of luck.
Well, one of the more galling things on the part of the Republicans is that they suggested that the whole FAA thing was just a political manipulation and that it wasn't real. And I think that the idea that these are absolutely real cuts finally hit home to them. I don't think so, Chris, that we've given up leverage. This is not the only thing that's going to come up, and I don't think it's going to be the only effort that the only squawking that the Republicans are going to do
about the cuts.
I think that it underscores that these are absolutely real, that there are consequences to the sequester.
Congressman, do you think an opportunity was missed for leverage here? How would, if you could run the clock back the last 3 or 4 days, how would you have liked to see this play out?
Well, I do think an opportunity was missed, and I think the first strategic mistake occurred in the Senate. The Senate majority could have sent over a bill that dealt with the FAA issue, but also perhaps dealt with the long-term unemployment issue.
You could have attached something to it.
Or dealt with the Head Start issue.
Right.
Or dealt with the Meals on Wheels issue. And then sent the bill over to the House of Representatives and forced the House GOP majority to vote it down.
To kick out the kids on Head Start or to kick out the unemployed. And instead what you got was, and we should be very clear about this, I can go through the roll call we have here who voted for and against the bill in the House. On the Senate side, it was adopted through unanimous consent. No one's on the record, right? It just magically appeared out of the Senate as a fait accompli.
I didn't realize that affluent business travelers was such a tremendous lobby. I mean, this bill was adopted with record speed when you've got vulnerable Americans suffering all across the country. Hopefully this will wake up the least amongst us to stand up and put the same level of pressure on Washington to act.
Congresswoman, quickly, when do you think the next opportunity comes to extract that leverage? What's the next fight you see brewing on the sequester?
Well, we're going to continue to raise the issues that you did tonight. All of the various cuts that hurt the people who need the help the most, that need cancer research and Head Start. In Indiana, they're doing a lottery to figure out which kids are going to be thrown out of their Head Start program. And this is not the end of that.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries of New York, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky of Illinois. It was really a great pleasure to have you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
President Obama made history today doing something that took 97 years for a president to do. That's coming up.